OK, we just heard some of the testimony, some of the statements, emotional statements, unsurprisingly, from the families of those released hostages. One, Vicky Cohen, the mother of a hostage survivor, saying that she never slept for a moment. The anxiety never stopped. And it comes, of course, in which Hamas has said that they are going to hand over more hostage bodies later on tonight. But emotional scenes there in Tel Aviv from the families of those hostage victims. We're going to take you just briefly now to the White House because simultaneously at the same time, Donald Trump is hosting the Argentinian Prime Minister at a cabinet meeting. Let's just have a listen in to what the US President has to say.
En el que, digamos, gracias al gran liderazgo suyo, presidente Trump, ha logrado la paz en Medio Oriente. No solo este gran logro que ha sido alcanzar la paz en Medio Oriente, sino lograr el retorno de los 20 rehenes vivos. Además, quiero también felicitar por esa labor y por entender.
Well, I promised you President Trump, but you've got President Milei instead, or the back of his head. That's the Argentinian president speaking there in the White House. We'll keep across, of course, what is happening there, particularly if Donald Trump talks about the situation in the Middle East, and we'll bring you that when we can here on Sky News. But let's first of all start tonight's Politics Hub with our duo for this evening. That's the former Conservative MP Jonathan Cullis and the Labour peer Baroness Margaret Hodge. Very good evening to you both. Margaret, let's first of all start with you if we can. Just a reflection on the emotional statements that we've heard there from Tel Aviv tonight.
Well, I don't know how you felt. I felt very emotional just listening to them. And, you know, we're quite detached and far away from the reality of it all. And I just thought, I don't know how any of them are actually giving those statements so soon after they've been reunited with their loved ones. It's very, very powerful testimony. And it brings back a lot of the feelings that I had on the 7th of October. One of the kibbutz that was attacked was one that I'd visited. I don't know if you'd visited it as well, a few months before. And the people who'd looked after us at the kibbutz in that day, we learnt that the parents had been killed and that the son survived by lying underneath his parents' body. So it was a very, very traumatic attack, absolutely inhumane. But everything that happened afterwards was equally awful and terrible for the Palestinians. And this is a great day. I mean, you can see how difficult the road to peace is going to be. I've always felt it's been ridiculous. It was stupid. Not stupid, it was inappropriate to think about a two-state solution at this point. What we need is a peace process, and we learned that really from Northern Ireland. And hopefully this is the start of a peace process. But you can even see that in people wanting their loved ones returned and those of the bodies of people who were killed returned. You can see the difficulties that are going to emerge. There's so many challenges. You know, the West Bank wasn't mentioned in Donald Trump's thing. The Palestinians didn't take part in it. Gaza is still half occupied by the Israelis. Are they going to accept the new international force that's going to come? There's endless problems.
Lots of questions indeed. And Jonathan, we are expecting, actually, I must say to viewers, to hear also from some other families in the next hour here, and we'll of course bring you that on Sky News. Your reflection on hearing, you know, you think about these relatives who have done nothing but worry over the last couple of years.
I can't begin to imagine what they've been going through. And like Margaret rightly said and very movingly said, the strength of conviction to stand up and talk so movingly, so openly, so vulnerably in front of the world about their plight, about their situation, about their relief, quite frankly, that they have been able to bring their loved ones home alive, but their sadness still that there are many who are yet to be returned to, as they've said, rightly want the family to have closure and enable to have that burial that is so important. And I think, as Margaret's pointed out, there's a very long road ahead. I think remarkable how much Donald Trump was referenced by a lot of those people, again, reaffirming what effectively the international world order is saying, which is he's pulled off a pretty impressive masterstroke here in bringing these people together, both sides. And I actually think there was something in his statement to the Parliament yesterday that's kind of gone unnoticed. He referenced that he thought to the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should be given a pardon. I think that was quite a tactical mission of Donald Trump to almost say, give him a pardon to enable him the space to walk off from centre stage, because I do think President Trump realises that for this peace deal to go all the way through, Netanyahu is not going to cannot be a central figure in that.
And we'll be talking about both of these issues as we go along the programme. As you said, there's a lot to talk about. But I want to start off, actually, by picking up on what you talked about, which is about Northern Ireland and my experience and my kind of thought on all of this. Because every evening after school, I was one of those kids who would rush home to tune into the evening news. And night after night in the 1990s, it seemed to be dominated by two intractable conflicts. Two conflicts that were entrenched in deep division, hatred, decades of violence, dare I say. But it was also a decade in which there was a concerted effort on the world stage to try and bring them to an end. Now, one of them, of course, was the conflict in the Middle East. The other was much, much closer to home in Northern Ireland. And yet, by the end of the 1990s, both conflicts were in a very different place. The Good Friday Agreement of 1998 effectively ended that 30-year civil war, the worst in Western Europe. And yes, the peace process has not been perfect in Northern Ireland. Issues remain. You only have to look at Parliament's attempts today to deal with legacy issues through legislation to see just that. It has been a long process, but it is one that has largely worked. Now, I'm not trying to claim these conflicts are in any way the same. The continuous wars that we've seen in the Middle East are in many ways far more complex. They've been more bloody, they're more multi-layered with lots of different players. But could what has happened in Northern Ireland be helpful? Could it help lay some sort of path to lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinian people? I think it may, and many do seem to agree, particularly those who've worked in Northern Ireland over the years, including, it must be said, the Prime Minister. Here's what Keir Starmer had to say yesterday.
Decommissioning of weaponry of Hamas is hugely and critically important for the future peace. We have got experience in this in relation to Northern Ireland and decommissioning of the IRA's weaponry, and that's why I do think, and why I've suggested the UK would be well placed to carry out that vital role.
Well, some of those most difficult, complex issues around the destruction of weapons, the disbanding of terrorist organisations, and big questions over governance and consent are now largely, thankfully, consigned to history in Northern Ireland. And how to come up with a plan around reconciliation and legacy, well, they're being used as blueprints elsewhere in the world. But what I find is one of the most difficult issues, possibly the most difficult issue when it comes to any conflict and its resolution, is that issue of trust. It can take years and years to build, and yet it will always remain pretty perilous. But it is a vital ingredient to every successful peace process. And unfortunately, it's all too absent in Israel, in Gaza, in the West Bank, throughout the Middle East. Building that trust may well be an impossible task. But let's be honest also, there hasn't been a better opportunity in decades to at least try. Now, we're talking about the Prime Minister. That was him in Egypt yesterday. Here's what Sir Keir Starmer had to say in the Commons earlier on today. He was talking about trying to bring what he described as a terrible chapter to a close. And he also talked about the UK's efforts in trying to, or in the lead up to the deal that we saw signed yesterday.
Let no one be any doubt that none of this would have been possible without President Trump. This is his peace deal, delivered, of course, with President Sisi of Egypt, the Emir of Qatar, and President Erdogan of Turkey. Alongside our partners, we have also offered the UK's full support to these efforts. Mr. Speaker, we've worked behind the scenes for months with the US, Arab, and European nations to help deliver a ceasefire, get the hostages out, get aid in, and secure a better future for Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. I am proud of our contribution. And, Mr. Speaker, we are in a position to play this role precisely because of the approach this government takes. And, Mr. Speaker, that does include our decision to recognise the state of Palestine.
Well, that was the Prime Minister speaking a little earlier. Let's bring in Tamara Cohen, our political correspondent, who is with us. And we saw this debate, didn't we, over the weekend about what role the UK played, frankly, some would suggest, if any, in all of this. What did the Prime Minister have to say on that?
So he was updating MPs about his trip to Sharm el-Sheikh, where he saw the document signed. He saw Donald Trump say, this is the end of the conflict. And important to say, he did lavish praise on the US president, say this was his deal. He brought all the parties together. But he also said the UK had played a key role, and this has, of course, been the subject of some controversy. Mike Huckabee, who is the US ambassador to Israel, had called a cabinet minister delusional for making this point, although others in the US administration have had a different view. Now, Keir Starmer talked about the UK playing what he called a typical UK role, quiet, behind-the-scenes, diplomatic, helpful steps towards the desired end. And he talked about the roles of people who worked closely with him. We can't know what the conversations were, for example, between the National Security Advisor who was with him yesterday in Egypt and the US counterparts. But certainly people have mentioned to me that what ended up happening with this first stage getting done is quite similar to the approach that Jonathan Powell, as Margaret was saying, pushed in Northern Ireland, that you don't have to agree absolutely everything at the start. You have to get the parties to agree something, and then that generates momentum to do something, to do the next stage and get everyone invested in doing the next stage. Now, this was not Kemi Badenoch's view, however. She said the UK
today,
had not been at the heart of it yet. Some cries of shame from Labour MPs. Should we hear a bit of what she said?
It saddens me that the Prime Minister's statement does not appear to show that the UK was at the heart of any of these efforts specifically. It is quite clear that UK relations with Israel have been strained by the actions of this government. Their view, and they have stated publicly, is that it looks like under pressure from his own backbenchers, the Prime Minister has taken the wrong decisions, time and time again, diminishing our influence in the region. They can shout shame as much as they want to.
That is Kemi Badenoch speaking in the Commons a little earlier. We talked about the fact that we're going to hear from another group of the families, hostages in Israel. Let's go back to Tel Aviv and listen to the latest press conference.
Of my life, even more than Elkanah, my wedding day, even more than the day little Em was born. Yesterday I saw my husband and Re'em being born again. Their embrace, even though he could barely lift up our baby, he really, and our baby, our son, really received his father back. I couldn't have asked for more as a mother or a wife. And now it is our time to really heal our family. Re'em has become a little man over the last 2 years, and he understands and knows what it means to live without his father and to wait for him. We need to rebuild our family cell, and it moves me so much that at long last we can be rehabilitated. So many good people in the people of Israel helped us reach this moment when Elkanah can start his life again. I would like to thank every single person who supported and did, all those who made sure that the hostage issue would be in the headlines. Without your prayers and requests, we wouldn't have got him back. Without the headquarters of the hostages, the GSS, the IDF, those brave soldiers, it wouldn't have happened without you all. And of course, we wouldn't have received him back without President Trump, Stephen Witkoff, and the entire administration that did everything possible to bring him home. We would like to thank each and every one of you. Elkanah saw you all in the streets from there, and he loved those posters. He listened, and you saw the prayers. And it helped everyone who was there. They saw and felt for a moment that they were not forgotten ever. Thank you all. You succeeded in truly saving him, but you also saved me and little Re'em. And on a personal note, I won. It was my personal victory. I managed to do it. My husband is here. And despite my difficulties with language, and I know that I can't speak well, I never gave up for one moment. I never gave up living and love. I never surrendered. And that, for me, is a personal, enormous victory. One should never, ever give up hope for better days. Please, I am asking you to remind you all that this has not ended. We cannot stop that clock in the hostage square, and you cannot take off that little yellow pin, that brooch, because there are still those who have to come back for burial. All of them must be brought back. In addition to that hostage, we do not know what his fate is. They must all come home. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Avi Ohana, the father of Yosef Chaim, and I would like to start with a prayer. Blessed be the fact that we have come back, and at this time we are here. We are here, moved, yes, with tears on our cheeks, but we are blessing everyone, and we never stopped hoping for it throughout these 2 really difficult years. Yosef Chaim's return after such a painful period is truly a paragon of the God in the heavens, of faith and of solidarity that is totally incomparable to anything. I would like to thank God Almighty, who was with us throughout, who held the hope in our hearts even when we believed that we had lost hope. Thank you to the people of Israel, every Jew in Israel and in the world who prayed and embraced, supported, encouraged, and who sent us those reinforcements. And thank you to the IDF and their courageous fighters, their daring and their courage. And thank you to the spiritual leadership who helped us throughout. The Rabbi David Abu Chatzera, Rabbi Shalom Charush, for strengthening their belief and their hope, and the prayers that strengthened us time and time again. Thank you to the 3 officers, those angels, truly the angels in green, who throughout this period accompanied us for 2 whole years, Erez, Limor, and Tal. They never left us for one moment. And with a painful heart, we are bowing our heads and are extending our deep condolences for those who lost their dearly beloveds during this war. Only one enormous embrace from us and a prayer that God will send them strength and compassion and consolation. And we would like to send a prayer of speedy recovery to all those who were wounded in their hearts and in their bodies and in their souls. And we would like to send that speedy wishes for speedy recovery to all of them. And thank you also to the brave decisions made by our leadership, our government, that brought about the return of our children. We are praying that God in the heavens will bring peace to the state of Israel. May this be the moment when redemption comes, that we should know peace and true unity, and that only love should reign here in Israel. So, with the help of God, they will be rehabilitated swiftly. And for those who were killed, may consolation be sent to them. And may the people of Israel really be able to thrive. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Maccabit. I'm a very proud auntie of Gali and Ziv Berman. They are home. They came back to our private picture of victory where they are embraced by Talia, their mother, the heroine. They came back to life after they'd been separated, and they were beaten so horrifically, and they were separated for the first time in their lives. But yesterday we started breathing in clean air. The fear, the yearning, in one moment became happiness, endless happiness that we didn't even know existed. Even in the most elated happiness, we do not forget, though, for any moment, all the victims of the 7th of October, the hundreds of heroic soldiers who lost their lives in that battle, and all those who were wounded, and all those killed by Hamas. And we thank you and we beg you to bring home Iluz, Doshi, all of them, that they will be brought home for burial. We will continue struggling and fighting endlessly, relentlessly, until the very last one is brought home. Gali and Ziv have been brought back to us, walking, smiling, and from this moment on, the path to recovery will begin that we have wished for. A deep sense of gratitude for the state of Israel, all those in uniform, all the negotiators, and President Trump and his team. Gali and Zivi are now being embraced by their mothers. She will never stop hugging them. Our picture of victory for our family is the return of all the 24 hostages for burial. Only then will we be healed and rehabilitated. We need that closure for the entire people of Israel and for the people of Israel that never tired, never gave up. And all our dearly beloved relatives, each and every one of you, you are definitely on the right side of history. And yes, but we must continue this mission until the last hostage is home. We would like to express our gratitude to the hostage headquarters that became a home for all those volunteers, the 101 shift, as it was called, that embraced us and were with us, and to the President of Israel, who was an anchor for our family, and all the officers from the administration, the hostage administration led by Gal Hirsch and Kfar Aza and Beit Govrin, and our wonderful people who fell in love with Gali and Ziv without even knowing them. And thank you to the Sheba Hospital and their amazing multidisciplinary team. And thank you to the media that ensured that everyone would hear about Gali and Ziv. Now a long personal rehabilitation process starts. Please respect our privacy and enable Zivi and Gali that space, and for us as well, the family.
For the first time in 2 years, our family can finally breathe. Gali and Ziv are home. They are safe, alive, and back in the arms of our mother, who never stopped believing this day would come. For 738 days, our lives were trapped between hope and fear. Yesterday, that chapter ended. Seeing Gali and Ziv again, holding them after so long, was like feeling the world start to move again. None of this would have been possible without the leadership and determination of President Trump. For months, He pushed forward when others hesitated, proving that courage and conviction can change history. We are deeply grateful to President Trump, to Steve Witkoff, and to the American administration that stood with us and made this miracle possible. You give me my brothers back. I would like to thank the people of Israel who stood by us for 2 long years. But even in this moment of joy, we cannot forget those still waiting, families who are still living the nightmare, soldiers who gave everything to make this day possible, and the 24 hostages who have not yet come home. Gali and Ziv are home. Now we must bring everyone back. That is the only way this story can truly end. Thank you so much.
Good evening. I'm Miri Ben Ami. I'm the mother of Yosef Chai Ohana. She's saying the most sacred prayer that we have arrived back at this time. Thank you, God Almighty, and the Rabbi Nachman Breslev, and God Almighty for everything that he has done and enabled me to pray. Thank you to all the rabbis, and he's mentioning the names of all those just people. Thank you to the soldiers and the forces. Thank you to the Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. Thank you to President Trump and to the headquarters of the hostages and the officers and the people of Israel who have supported. When my son was in captivity, I created a belief project, which is called Yosef Chaim Miriam, that distributes belief and prayers based on Rabbi Nachman Breslev's prayers. There is a little kiosk actually in the hostage square. The project was established thanks to my son, and all for the sake of the hostages and the people of Israel. I've decided to continue with this project in order to, as a vote of gratitude for what he did and brought our children home. Please go into that site and please God that everyone will be brought home. Thank you.
There you go. That was the latest testimony and statements from the families of those released hostages in Tel Aviv. While they were speaking, we said we'd keep across this for you. Donald Trump has also been in the White House meeting with the Argentinian president and did talk about the situation in Gaza. Let's have a listen into what the US president had to say.
How long will it take Hamas to disarm, and can you guarantee that is going to happen?
Well, they're going to disarm, and because they said they were going to disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them.
How will you do that?
I don't have to explain that to you. But if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. They know I'm not playing games. Okay? Now, we did something monumental. We got the hostages back. That was the first thing we had to do. Above all else, get the hostages back. Now, they misrepresented because we were told they had 26, 24 of dead hostages, if we can use those terms. And it seems as though they don't have that because we're talking about a much lesser number. But that's a very tough subject. I want them back. That's what they said. I want them back. Also, they said they were going to disarm. And initially speaking, they needed, they did take out a couple of gangs that were very bad, very, very bad gangs, and they did take them out, and they killed a number of gang members. And that didn't bother me much, to be honest with you. That's okay. It's a couple of very bad gangs. It's no different than other countries. Like Venezuela sent their gangs into us, and we took care of those gangs. We have Washington, D.C., is one of the safest cities in the country. It was one of the worst cities in the country if you go back just a little while ago, right? Now it's safe. You can walk to work. Isn't it nice? But we have told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes. You say
because
quickly.
everyone says, oh, well, they won't disarm. They will disarm. And I spoke to Hamas, and I said, you're going to disarm, right? Yes, sir, we're going to disarm. That's what they told me. They will disarm, or we will disarm them. Got it? Okay.
What is
next.
the deadline you're going to put on that? You say-
Well, let's go to the White House and bring in David Blevins, who's there for us. And David's, in no uncertain terms, he was pretty clear there that if Hamas don't disarm, they will disarm them, though not entirely clear how that will actually come about.
No prevarication whatsoever from the President of the United States, making clear where he stands on the issue of the Hamas commitment to disarm. That will be the headline, I think, from this short press conference he's had. If they don't disarm, we will disarm them. He said he hoped it would happen quickly, but it could happen violently. He also went on to say that his people had been in touch with Hamas and they'd made a firm commitment to give up their guns in due course, and he was confident they would stick to that. So he then proceeded to talk about his other concerns related to the peace deal in the Middle East, particularly around hostages, as you heard. He said they had promised to release the remains of more hostages than they've actually done, and that he wants them back. So this whole issue clearly remains the focus of the President's attention, despite the fact that they have only been able to complete phase one of the peace deal at this stage. On his return from the Middle East overnight, he was adamant that he had not been too soon to suggest that the war had completely ended there, because he believes that actually is what has happened. He's had a very punishing schedule for the last couple of days, returning from Israel and Egypt in the middle of the night here to the White House. He's currently meeting with the President of Argentina. They're also dealing with quite a lot on the agenda, given that Argentina is just a couple of weeks from midterm elections, and that the United States has recently bailed out the Argentine economy to the tune of $20 billion. And clearly Argentina wants more financial support to shore up its economy. For the United States, what's in it for America right now? I suppose greater influence in Latin America in a bid to counter any Russian and Chinese influence that is growing there.
OK, David, live for us there at the White House. Thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Jonathan Gullis and Dame Margaret Hodge, who are both with us in the studio. Baroness Margaret Hodge, have I given you a different
Just call me Margaret Hodge.
I'll just call you Margaret. There is a lot to dissect here, isn't there? I mean, first of all, he was, as David was saying, pretty blunt about this idea that Hamas is going to disarm, but obviously he wouldn't be drawn on how he might make that happen.
Well, let's take the thing first. First, Trump doesn't get involved in the details of negotiations, thank goodness. And if you go back to what are the lessons that we can learn from Northern Ireland, the decommissioning of arms from the IRA was something that was put into the long term in those negotiations. And that's where I could feel the arm of either Jonathan Powell or Tony Blair in the writing of those of the outline of the peace deal. So this is not going to happen early. This is something that will take, if we've learned anything from Northern Ireland, that is something that will take a lot of time. And you've just got to take it. I mean, I've been desperate for a peace process, and what we've just got to the start of that, and we've got to take that through. Can I just come back to something you said earlier about trust? Yep. Because I was in Israel before October the 7th in 2023, and what really heartened me was the amount of activity that was taking place at grassroots level, building trust between the Jews and the Palestinians and the Arabs. There was really a lot of voluntary organisations that were working there, either in education or in health or in other fields, building that trust. And you felt they were beginning to trust each other. I mean, one of the great things was there was a group of doctors who every Saturday went across to the Gaza Strip to provide health services to the Palestinians living in Gaza. Now, that trust was broken. When I went back after the 7th of October, what surprised me was, it was a country in trauma after the 7th of October. But I think it's there to be rebuilt. And you build that trust, which you said was so important, not top down from Trump saying...
So the embers there of trust might still hopefully be there.
Might still come.
Jonathan, just on terms of what we've heard from President Trump there, what I also find fascinating is less the detail or even what he's had to say about Hamas, but What is clear to me, and we got this from the press, is that he is going to be almost forced to be engaged in this process going forward, which, by the way, probably will be the best thing for the process, if that makes sense.
Which is why I think it was smart for all those leaders, particularly European leaders, to go out to Sharm el-Sheikh and be part of the process in order to keep in the ear of President Trump. They're not just telling him what a great guy he is, which obviously is important to him, but also reminding him, rightly, of the fact that there is still a long-term commitment, which the US has to be at the forefront of. He can't just take his foot off the gas, to use an American slang. So, you know, the reality, and also allow them to, by the way, whisper in his ear about now Ukraine. So I think there's important to say, look, with what President Trump said, I laugh because I don't know how to be shocked anymore by what President Trump does or doesn't say. But I think actually it is important that when you're dealing in a peace process that does involve a terrorist organisation, you need a strong man, strong woman. And I think President Trump has reasserted in the West that he's willing to be the strong man that the West has so been desperately calling out for.
But what you don't want to do is push it too early and too hard, and in a way break the peace process in doing that. That's the sort of skill, the diplomatic skill that we need within that process.
Well, just to pick up on that, just with tomorrow, just finally before we let you go as well, is that when you look at it, actually, maybe the process works with Donald Trump being quite abrasive up front or whatever, but also that people like Keir Starmer and others, I mean, it seems to be the argument from Downing Street is that they had influence behind closed doors. You know, Keir Starmer's relationship with Trump matters in these situations, that he can get him to kind of move into different positions.
That's right. I think they painted it in two ways. They said that the UK had influence behind the scenes, having these conversations which got all the relevant participants to this point. And Keir Starmer has had lots of calls with leaders in the region as well. Keir Starmer made a more controversial point in the Commons, where he said that the decision to recognise a state of Palestine, along with France and Canada, had actually eased the way to this point, which is not what a lot of other people think, including, of course, the US, with Marco Rubio saying it was a reward for terrorism and had actually slowed down the path to a ceasefire. So he said that the way it had spurred the ceasefire is because the Arab League had, for the first time, signed up to a declaration where they condemned October the 7th, which took them 2 years, and they had come to the view that Hamas could have no role. So he said that all helped to get to where we are. That's what Kemi Badenoch was criticising, but he said that's where the UK had played a role, but he also said they could play a role going forward. I don't know if we can hear what he said about that. He said it was in a few different ways. It was reconstruction. It was working. We can't listen to the clip, but he said it was reconstruction. He said it was also on this international stability force, which, as we can see from events there today, as several MPs mentioned it, that is going to be very much needed. And he said it was on decommissioning. So he said the UK had expertise beyond that of other countries, which it could deploy there. And you saw MPs with a background in kind of aid and humanitarian work, like Andrew Mitchell, also saying that the UK could play an important role there. OK, Tamara, as always, thank you very much indeed. Tamara Cohen there with the latest on the UK's position on all of this. And indeed, we will have continued coverage throughout the night of those testimonies that we've heard from Israel, from the families in Tel Aviv, and indeed what Donald Trump had to say in the White House with David Blevins throughout the evening here on Sky News. Do stay tuned for that. But we want to turn now, if we can, to domestic politics here in the UK, because, as we know, the party conference season is over, and we've had pretty extensive coverage of it here on the Politics Hub and indeed on Sky News. But has it actually changed anything? Has anyone's view changed? Well, earlier I caught up with our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Have a watch of this. Well, the party conference season is well and truly over. The question is, has it actually made any difference? Sam Coates is here with me. Sam, has it made any difference?
All the leaders have made their play over the last 3 weeks in particular. Has it changed the scores on the doors? The answer, Darren, is no. Look at this. Kemi Badenoch's big play on stamp duty has not changed the Conservative Party's fortunes one bit. No change from this weekend just gone to the one before. Labour, the Reform UK, all broadly in the same place that they were 1 month, even 2 months ago. So there have been a huge amount of effort gone into the party conferences, and really you haven't seen it change the dial, move the dial at all. Lib Dems doing quite well. Greens edging up a bit. I think the Greens are on their highest number that YouGov have had. But overall, I don't think, in particular, Kemi Badenoch wanted to change the conversation. It would be that.
And is this because people just aren't listening, they're not tuned into politics that much, or that actually no one was convinced by the offerings that any of the parties had?
Well, I think if you look at the parties themselves, this gives you something clear. Look, these are favourability ratings. So we ask whether you like somebody versus whether you don't. They're all in negative territories. You subtract one from the other. Just look how unpopular the parties are overall. That makes it very hard for people to listen. Reform, more unpopular than mid-August.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, they've gone down to -29. Labour down 4 on -41. Conservatives haven't improved. You know, they haven't improved, but they haven't got worse on -39. And the Lib Dems, the most popular or the least unpopular of the parties, doesn't translate into people wanting to vote for them, but they think they're quite cuddly.
And we have to talk about the leaders themselves, because that's been pretty key to what has been important in our politics over the last couple of weeks. And again, it's not necessarily the headline figures very good for any of them.
No, that's right. Look, again, Kemi Badenoch up 2 percentage points to -33. That's within the margin of error, it has to be said. So, yes, she made a big play. It hasn't improved her position really statistically at all. Keir Starmer, the most unpopular of the big leaders. Nigel Farage, you know, less popular than Kemi Badenoch, it has to be said. And actually, the two left-leaning leaders here, Ed Davey and Zach Polanski, you can see the Greens had their conference over the last few days. The Greens, Zach Polanski, up 7 percentage points. I'd watch what's going on with the Greens. There's a left alliance brewing, and that's possibly the most interesting thing in politics. But the bottom line is, Darren, this conference season, for all the effort and for all of the industry and speeches and meals and nights out that all of the politicians have had, hasn't really shifted the dial at all.
Dare I say, to quote a former Prime Minister, nothing has changed. Right, let's bring Jonathan and Margaret back in again. And what I take away from this, Jonathan, first of all, is that this is since August, by the way. These figures are since August. And our politics seems stuck.
I mean, can you imagine all those who have been busy prepping and planning and the speech writing, and then to see that nothing has changed must be quite
I mean, particularly must
demoralising.
be Kemi Badenoch, given that big announcement on...
Look,
on
I personally think Kemi Badenoch had the best party conferences of all political leaders. I think she went into that conference, there was a lot of discussion. Will she be challenged before Christmas? I think it's now solidified she's there until May. I thought she delivered a speech that delivered plenty of red meat in terms of policies for the party faithful. I must say that there were party members that were doom and gloom, and then the day she gave a speech, you would think that it was that suddenly things were about to turn a corner. And I kept trying to remind people, one speech doesn't suddenly change your fortunes on a Wednesday lunchtime when everyone else is at work, not tuning in, albeit, of course, I'm sure they did catch up on Sky later on in the day. So I think that, you know, for the Conservatives, the challenge for them now is to relentlessly campaign and focus, particularly on that £23 billion of welfare cuts, and try and use that as something to try and say to Rachel Reeves, we can help you find a way through the difficulty financially, and at the same time, the stamp duty campaign, which I think will be something that gets cut through across all age demographics. But they're going to have to sustain this. The campaign can't just be one speech and then go quiet and hope everyone remembers. Month after month, I think they're going to have to present new policies and new ideas. Otherwise, as we saw over the summer, Nigel Farage will swallow up the tension.
Margaret, also, let's be honest with this, it's not good for Keir Starmer, because one of Labour's biggest problems, and there's got many problems, but Starmer's just not popular. I mean, he's the most unpopular.
I never thought the party conferences would change anything. The only thing that might have changed politics would be if either of them had failed in delivering their leader speeches, and both of them did, you know, well, and sort of, you know, salvaged it in that sense. It is down now to, we've inherited a terrible position. I know you don't like to hear that, but it's true. Down now is, can we deliver? And can we rebuild trust? We're back to trust in British politics as well.
So you think if Labour can deliver, irrespective of how unpopular Starmer is, it should be all right on the night, if you like?
Or I think, you know, Starmer is a sort of, he's a character, you know, he's pragmatic, he's interested in the detail, he is determined to deliver. I mean, he's shown actually great leadership on the international stage. He's done that really well. If you can now translate that to these really difficult problems that we're having to deal domestically, and start delivering on health, start delivering on people feeling more, you know, better off with the cost of living, and just rebuild trust. It's all about people are, you know, tempted by reform, not because they really loved Nigel Farage. I mean, you look, his popularity ratings weren't brilliant. It's because they're fed up with us. They've lost trust in us.
The problem is that also that long list that he needs to sort out is very long and quite complex.
Yeah,
but we will keep across those figures and Sam and his polling throughout the months ahead. We also want to end tonight's programme by talking about one of those big issues. Possibly the biggest, actually, that of the economy, because the International Monetary Fund has released its outlook for the world economy, and it showed a pretty mixed picture for the UK. Ed Conway has been digging in to the numbers for us.
So the International Monetary Fund is meeting in Washington. As part of this big annual meeting, it brings out this. It's called the World Economic Outlook. It's essentially its 6-monthly opportunity to look at the state of the global economy. And it's worth reflecting, first of all, on what it says about the UK and other major economies around the world. Basically, the main thing people focus on with this is what it means for the growth rate. How much is income growing across the economy? And you can compare the UK with other countries around the world. And this is showing you, look, the UK versus G7 nations. This is something that I imagine Rachel Reeves will be very pleased about. The UK is the second strongest growing economy in the G7 this year. So 1.3% growth versus 2% in the US, and weaker growth throughout the rest of the G7, those industrialised economies around the world. And next year, I mean, it's not quite as strong as the rest next year, still 1.3%. Canada's a bit stronger. The US is stronger still. But again, it's kind of top half of the table. And I imagine the Chancellor will be pleased with that. She'll be talking about that. It's the kind of thing you probably might expect to hear her talk about when it comes to the budget. But here's the concern, OK? This is looking at overall growth rates, so overall gross domestic product growth. But you need to divide that by head of the population to get a sense of what it actually means for living standards. And of course, you know, the population in the country has been growing, largely thanks to immigration. And here's what happens if you do that. So if you divide these numbers by head of the population to get GDP per capita, look at the red bar, same year, OK, so 2026. And actually, GDP per capita, because of the higher population, is the weakest in the G7 in 2026. And actually, that's the number that most people will really focus on to give you a sense of just how much better off or worse off you're feeling. So that's GDP. How about inflation? OK, because there's a lot of focus on what's going on with prices. You remember that big peak we had not long ago, the cost of living crisis. This is showing you inflation in the US, the euro area and China. And it's worth just looking at the UK and comparing the UK to other countries. Because look, here we are in red, and the UK had a higher peak, so this is prices going up, higher than most other countries around the world. But even more importantly, where we are right now, look, the UK is higher than the US, it's higher than the euro area, it's higher than China. And what's perhaps concerning is that the IMF says that's going to continue in the next few years. So this is, again, their forecast for inflation for this year, and the UK has the highest inflation rate in the G7, considerably higher than many in the euro area. And next year also, so all the bars are lower, so that's one thing. Inflation is coming down across the board, but still the UK higher than all the others. And it's not just inflation, it's also long-term interest rates. You remember we've been focusing a lot, haven't we, on what's going on with those bond yields, because it matters, it affects the interest costs we're all having to pay. Well, again, here's the US, here's the euro area, here's Japan, and here is the UK. And these charts, and this is charts produced by the IMF, are the kind of thing that are going to be discussed in Washington, where the Chancellor is going. And I imagine she'll have to explain, you know, part of the reason for why the UK is an outlier when it comes to interest rates and when it comes to inflation and what's going on with growth as well.
Ed Conway there. Now, it must be said, we've been here before, of course. Lots of people would suggest the IMF are not necessarily right all of the time, but it is a marker for us. And Margaret, the problem here is it's a bit of a mixed picture. To me, is it a mixed picture? When you look at GDP per capita, what really matters, whether you, I and everyone else, frankly, are getting wealthier, we're near the bottom of the pile. The only reason our economy's doing well is because of population growth. And that has to be concerning for Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, the pursuit of growth is really, really important, because that is the way in which you can raise living standards and people can start feeling better off, and that's what we've got to get to. And I think, as I read those figures, I thought that, you know, we're bad on inflation, but it's a temporary shock. You know, the IMF doesn't say that's a sort of permanent, you know, it'll come down by the end of 26. They say it'll be down at 2% again. And she's taking a sort of risk and going for growth with some things which are sort of, we've now got to just hope that
Is she taking risks, though? I mean, it some ways seems quite tepid so far. I mean, surely if growth is everything, you have to be a bit bolder.
Well, put a huge amount into capital. She is taking risks with how she's managing the tax and spend relationship, and you know, we'll see what she does in the budget. She's got some very difficult choices there, with some very clear manifesto commitments, which I am sure she will want to keep. So it's a risky position. She's got all these things. You were talking about bond yields. I mean, what amazed me last week was when there was all that stuff going on in France with Macron, instability of Macron. What happened? Immediately, our bond rates went up. So that we've got all this global stuff happening, which really impacts on our ability to control our economy.
Jonathan, the thing is that some of this actually, this economic growth, is outside the government's control. We have to recognise that as well.
So, of course, we have to recognise there's international factors, but at the end of the day, Rachel Reeves has borrowed over £16 billion more than she was predicted in this financial year. That's April 2025.
And she would say it's because the inheritance...
We've seen inflation up, and obviously significant in food inflation. We've seen energy bills up. We're seeing unemployment up. We're seeing vacancies available down. That's predominantly hitting those under 25 and under, if you look in the latest figures that are being produced there. The reality is that Rachel Reeves' jobs tax, going after pensioners at one point, going after family farmers, and now inevitably going to have to go other sectors in the economy, is going to strangle the UK economy.
It also like she'd be a Conservative Chancellor. Because many would say that's exactly what you do.
Well, unfortunately, Rachel Reeves has got to find some ways of actually cutting government spending rather than having to always constantly pull the tax lever. The Conservatives have a plan, £23 billion on welfare. If Labour were smart, they would insert that into their budget and force those people to vote for it.
We have run out of time.
We run into an argument.
Jonathan Gillis and Baroness, not Dame Margaret Hodge, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme tonight. It's been a pretty lively programme all round. That is it, indeed, for me for tonight. We're back, of course, at 7 tomorrow. Do join me then, if you can. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sergey and me, and there'll be continuing coverage from Israel and, indeed, Washington throughout the evening here. Sky News. Have a good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.